So happy you guys are able to join us in such a hot summer New York City heat wave day. I think if there was ever a moment that we want to advocate for climate, it's now, right? We're feeling the impacts of it everywhere around the world. It's a whole mood. So welcome to our high-level political forum side event, Food Systems, Biodiversity, and Climate, a recipe for a greener future, co-organized by Tzu Chi, World Food Forum, the Urban Garden Initiative, National Young Farmers Coalition, Mercy for Animals, Pro Veg International, and Act for Food. I think it's such a wonderful group of co-organizers. It took a little while to get through, but I think it really is everyone coming together in the spirit of conversation, collaboration, and exploration, right? We know that like food systems is serving as an integral link in addressing not only our biodiversity crises, our climate change crises, and then also like a large food insecurity problem that we're facing around the world. And so now more than ever, I think we need to be innovative in thinking how we can work in holistic and intersectional ways. And so I'm delighted to be here with you all today as we have this fabulous panel that is coming together to really bring their expertise and reflect with us on this issue. So to my right, I have Charlene Mersai, who's the National Environment Coordinator of the Republic of Palau. And then, can you check on? Yep. So online with us, we have Cecilia Medino Petro, who's a agriculture sector professional with the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development of Colombia. Then on my far right, we have Elena Ochinikova, who's the technical officer from the Food and Agriculture Organization Office of Sustainable Development Goals. I'm getting through it. And then to her left, we have Megan Chen, who's the founder and executive director of the Urban Garden Initiative. And then to her left, we have Naveen Durbakula, who's the co-founder and co-executive director of Food for Thought. So really diverse panel of member states, UN agencies, and then civil society, youth, actors across the spectrum. We're really here to be reflecting with you all as we think of what is the recipe for a better food systems and how through the ways we transform it, are we able to better achieve our SDGs, look at the ways in which we transform our national food system pathways, whether it's within the COP space with our nationally determined contributions or within the CBD space, our national biodiversity strategies and action plans, right? So there's so much that's happening in this ecosystem, all starting from that seed of food systems. So I'll go first to start our conversation with Charlene, thinking about from a national perspective on your side, can you speak to how Palau is utilizing an integrated food systems approach to really strengthen our national climate change and biodiversity strategies?
Thank you. I think I would start by first saying that this effort of food systems strategy at the national government level is fairly recent. In 2020, we did a food systems dialogue of 2 rounds of that. And during a 6-month duration, we discovered 2 key lessons that sort of directed our current effort. Those lessons were number one, because we were aware as an isolated island state, we were very much dependent on imported foods. 80% of our foods is brought in. So the government has been prioritizing increasing food production for food security. We realized through the dialogue that that's not going to be enough. The second lesson was that while the national government was trying to figure out how to bring in more finances to help with the local communities, we should have been investing in the capacity of those local communities. So fast forward to today, there's been several initiatives that actually have begun since 2020. And really at the national government level, I see our role more and more as just a conduit of resources from the international community down to the local communities. Unfortunately, in spite of that effort, the process is not quite in place. So some communities that are active receive resources quicker than those. So with the more recent project, this is the Jeff 8 BGI, Blue Green Islands integrated program. Palau participated in that. And this is our largest Jeff-funded project, and we prioritize food systems. And what we really wanted to do with this particular, it's actually a pretty big project that we're not even sure if the national government has the capacity to do it, but we have to try, because up until Jeff 8 project, our funds have been up to 2 million, 3 million. They tend to be very sector focused. With this opportunity, we're really trying to do all of government approach. All ministries in the government have to have a role in addition to sort of establishing that structure. Each ministry also needs to establish some kind of a process to work with the different stakeholders. So not just the subnational governments, but NGOs and the private sector. The project the proposal is being reviewed. We hope that everything will go through and we will start in January 2025. But I think really in a nutshell, I would want to say that while the national government has capacity issues and we're trying to build on that, if anything, with this project, by the end of the duration of this project, we're hoping that each of the small communities, the local communities, will already have their own internal process in place. We'll already have a network where they can sort of have the sustainability in place to continue to access those resources after we finish this project. Thank you.
There's such a beautiful framing in how you've shared. Not only are we working through food systems looking at this, but it's really a holistic approach within government, right? And I think that model is something that civil society calls out truly, which is like we want a whole of society approach, right? And like we know these processes can work as long as they're put into play, right? So it's exciting to see you go through this process to really build out the mechanisms to ensure that accessibility and the holistic nature of it. So now I'm going to turn over to Cecilia to continue us on this conversation. Colombia is championing this year's Convention on Biological Diversity's COP, which brings together member states to look at like the biodiversity sector and how we're really looking and working to address the challenges plaguing that area. And I think they're really bringing this framework of holisticness as well, right? Like, so for Cecilia, on your side, can you share with us how Colombia is integrating food systems transformation and climate change strategies into their national biodiversity strategies and action plans, and how through this like nexus-based approach, we can really create a more resilient future?
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you for the invitation to participate in this meeting. I see you waiting from Colombia. To answer the questions, I would like to tell you that since the beginning of 2023, derived from the conventional biological diversity and the new global biodiversity framework to come in Montreal. And
Cecilia, give me 1 second. Your audio is a little low. If you hold your mic closer, try that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's better.
Yes.
Yes, that's good.
Okay. The questions, the answer to the question is derived from the Convention of Biological Diversity and the new Global Biodiversity Framework of CUM Montreal, and I with the commitments of national government in Colombia. The Ministry of Environment, by leadership of Minister Susana Muhammad, and advice technical assistant of Vice Ministers Mauricio Cabrera and Liliana Roa, behind the progress and process of updating and adjusting the current biodiversity action plan with resources from the Global Environment Fund, GEF, and United Nations Development Program, PNUD, and implementing actions of the Nature Conservancy, TNC. I should be know that government and society, public institution, from all sectors have been incorporated, as well social and community actors, civil society, and ethnic groups. The ministry has received support from international cooperation, particularly from the government of Germany, GCC in Colombia. The update in this plan is response for the 4 general objectives and the 23 goals in the global biodiversity framework. For example, global goal 8 is aligned with the objectives of climate change, the process of restoration, protections of water, and the promotion of clean energies. But not only contributes to the protection by biodiversity and the resilience on communities and the extreme climate events. Um, in, la, in line with Goal 10, these objectives are integrated that the areas dedicated to sustainable agriculture, particularly the use of biological diversity, contributing to resilience and productivity, the long term, and food security. This is the first time that the framework of the biodiversity agreement includes the fulfillment and climate change goals from the perspective of nature-based solutions and their contribution to the goals of adaptation and mitigation to climate change. In this moment, this process of updating the MBSAP are promote agricultural practice and to reduce environmental impact and support the conservation of ecosystems. Um, these adopting more sustainable goals and implementing innovation agricultural technologies that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and improve resource efficiency. The agricultural sector has worked on the transformation of food systems and link for the update NDCs, the National Biodiversity Policy, from the contribution to reduce the impact on production, distribution, transformation, and consumption, the food by 3% and 2030, the guarantee of food, more diverse local foods to promote the crop diversity, healthy and sustainable food environments. Um, in this moment, the agricultural sector, with the support of WWF, proposed the actions route, but the correlation of the MBSAF and the NDCs and the system sustainable agri-food to link the process update NDC 2025. They are starting to work with representative actors of the productive sectors of the validation and constructions, the inputs from the analyze for the progress, the objectives, and NDC in our country. We hope to have this route at the end in August in this year and launch during the remainder in this year. Thank you very much.
Cecilia, thank you so much for those reflections. I think it's beautiful as you lift up the importance of not only international cooperation in our ability to kind of support each other as countries, but then also lifting up particularly how our global biodiversity frameworks goals are aligning with these different initiatives, and then bringing forth how within Colombia you're working with different sectors in inclusive ways to promote more local foods, crop diversity, and healthy, sustainable foods in a way that not only supports biodiversity, but also addresses our climate crisis and really builds this resilience. And so I think we're really looking forward to the continued work in this space as we really look to build this holistic framework that allows for us to not only address our biodiversity loss, but our climate crisis as well. And so now I'm going to pass it over to Elena to kind of continue on our conversation from a UN agency agency's perspective, thinking about as a UN agency of FAO, we've been tasked to eradicate hunger and malnutrition. And so thinking through this lens, can you share with us how we can transform our food systems to really implement our 2030 agenda for sustainable development by achieving zero hunger and environmental sustainability at the same time?
Thank you. Thank you so much. And first of all, thank you for inviting FAO to this event to discuss this very important topic. Our agri-food systems are indeed challenged by the profound problems caused by climate change. And I'd like to share some figures with you to put this into the perspective at the global level. So by 2030, climate change could push over 100 million people into extreme poverty and elevate the number of people at risk of hunger to 183 million by 2050. These are huge numbers, right? From the economic point of view, we now know that annual loss from disasters in crop and livestock production, they average 123 billion US dollars. But more than that, they disproportionately affect the most vulnerable, including women, youth, and vulnerable populations all over the world. At the same time, agri-food systems contribute significantly to greenhouse gas emissions. But if we look at climate finance allocated to agri-food systems, it stands very low at only 4.3% of total global climate finance. And this declining trend is very, very alarming because it represents a missed opportunity to harness agri-food systems' immense potential to build resilience, adaptation, and emission reduction. What's important is that transformation of agri-food systems not only can help us reduce those greenhouse gas emissions and protect natural resources and biodiversity, but they can help us ensure that we have all nutritious food and that it is available, accessible, and affordable globally. So what can we do to transform agri-food systems? FAO specifically calls for increased investment in science, technology, innovation, and data to inform policies and actions. Scaling up innovative financial mechanisms such as risk management and results-based financing is crucial for attracting private investment. But in addition to that, a recent policy brief by FAO puts a lot of emphasis on leveraging domestic resources and effectively allocating subsidies to amplify their efficacy in addressing food crisis. Agricultural producer support needs to be repurposed to bring about food systems transformation. Second, countries must adopt holistic and integrated national policies and strategies across sectors to address interconnected challenges of climate change, environment, and food security. This means that nationally determined contributions, NDCs, national adaptation plans, NAPs, should align seamlessly with other national commitments, such as national biodiversity strategies and action plans, national water roadmaps towards the 2030 agenda, and national action plans to combat desertification and degradation. Third, manage natural resources sustainably and restore ecosystems. 1/3 of the world's agricultural land is already degraded. This makes agricultural systems, which means crops, livestock, fisheries, forestry, aquaculture, more productive, efficient, and sustainable is critical to managing and protecting the environment and the natural reserve. Additionally, shifting to healthy diets, which is all about our choices, and reducing food loss and waste are essential strategies. If we manage to reduce food loss and waste, we can benefit from a triple win opportunity with immense impact on food security, climate benefits, and increased availability of nutritious food, while improving the overall sustainability of the agri-food systems. And finally, empowering small-scale producers, women, youth, indigenous peoples, and other vulnerable groups is a part of the solution and is essential for a just transition. They need to be supported through social protection policies, financial incentives, and capacity building initiatives. Now, all this data may be sobering, but this is not to put us all into a very depressed state. I'd like at the same time to convey the message that solutions exist and that these solutions can help us simultaneously address the challenges of food security, climate change, and biodiversity loss. They can deliver multiple benefits and encourage efficient use of limited financial resources, but also help to manage risks and uncertainties and improve our long-term resilience and perspectives.
I love that. Thank you so much, Elena, for those reflections in thinking about not only how we have this roadmap already, right, but solutions exist towards this just transition and really pointing out that all it takes is this shift towards holistic approaches, right? And we're so excited that Palau, Colombia are here and sharing those frameworks as well, right? So it's like this very integrated conversation. And I think part of the holistic answer, the holistic approach requires like youth engagement, right? So I'm so happy to now pass it over to Megan to continue us in this conversation, right? So in thinking about as a founder of a youth-led food systems nonprofit, you've really been modeling how this approach can take place to make food systems more accessible to individuals and communities living in urban environments, right? So I'd love for you to share and reflect with us how this model of empowerment and action in food systems can really lead to transformations of communities, including in the spaces of addressing challenges of biodiversity and climate.
Yeah, thank you, Steve, for the question. And thank you guys all for being here today. So just by starting, I'd love to set a little bit more context of what we've been doing at the Urban Garden Initiative for the past 5 years. So we are an international for youth by youth organization that aims to inspire and empower young people to achieve urban sustainability through our gardening-based program. In the past 5 years, we've been able to grow to over 60 chapters around the world, engage with over 10,000 young people, but we started in a super grassroots way. And so as we're thinking about a lot of this work when it comes to food and education, particularly in our case, there's a few different levers of change that we often have to think about. And it's really about identifying quantifiable metrics of how do we look at education as something that has huge potential, but also when you're teaching a workshop or you're doing something at the moment, a lot of times you don't really know what that long-term potential of that's going to be. And so a few different ways that we've thought about that when it pertains to climate action is thinking about engagement, obviously during the workshop. Are youth really learning in this hands-on way? Are they engaged in the workshop? Do they like the work that they're doing? But also now we're tracking a lot of those longer term things. Are some of the middle schoolers and elementary schoolers that started these urban gardens with us, participated in these programs, are they now in high school and college turning to become environmental change makers? Are they thinking about a lot of their different decisions, even as small or large decisions, more consciously? And so this can be in a range of different fields. Not everyone, of course, per se goes into food systems, but a lot of times this can change a lot of their behavior in other ways. And so we have begun to see that over now the years that we've kind of grown the organization, that a lot of these middle schoolers we worked with have turned and in high school are now pursuing, environmental science degrees, engaging more with different types of food systems education, et cetera. So that's one side when it comes to climate action. But I think as we've grown out a lot of this work, as we think about biodiversity more largely, especially in urban areas, past food systems, there's a couple other things that we're also thinking about, right? We're thinking about urban forestry, the biodiversity that exists in urban environments when it comes to green spaces. So 34 of the world's biodiversity hotspots are actually in urban areas, which a lot of times people don't really think about that statistic. And so we are thinking a lot about that when it comes to where our urban gardens are placed, how we're also working to protect a lot of other urban green spaces that exist, and ensuring that we're working with other organizations in this space to continue to grow a lot of those movements that are already happening. And then more largely, as a student, I'm studying urban studies and architectural design. And so we're also thinking about green infrastructure. We're thinking about urban flooding, urban heat island effect, a lot of these other problems that simultaneously engage with a lot of the food systems and urban gardening work that we're doing. But we're thinking about that a little bit more holistically and ensuring that we're thinking about all of these problems together when we're designing solutions for young people to get involved in them.
I love that. Thanks, Megan. In thinking about like how we ensure that it's almost like a repeated conversation thread here where like we have existing frameworks. How do we make them more holistic? How do we repurpose, reshape to allow for this opportunity of empowerment, education, and youth involvement to be in the space? And then also at the same time, how do we allow for things like urban spaces that are already protecting biodiversity to be strengthened so that they really become champions as environments to be able to move us forward in a more sustainable future. And I think I'll pass it on now to Naveen to continue in this conversation, thinking about that fight towards justice, right? As a food systems advocate yourself, you're really working towards a just transition of our food system away from like these exploitative and extractive practices, right? And we know that like this is at the heart of our work, right? If we don't shift away from exploitation, like no matter what solutions we create, we'll be repeating these same cycles. And so I'd love for you to share with us how our food systems lie at the heart of this intersectional fight of climate change, biodiversity loss, and the achieving the SDGs.
Yeah, well, that's a pretty loaded question. But I think, as the Eat Lancet report puts it, food is the single strongest lever we have to optimizing both human health and sustainability on this planet. It overlaps with so many of the SDGs directly: SDG 2, ending hunger; SDG 3 on health and well-being; SDG 13 on climate action. But it also virtually overlaps with every other SDG, right? Because you can't have quality education if children aren't being fed properly. You can't have gender equality if the food system is set up disenfranchises women, specifically female farmers and food workers. So really at the heart of this discussion is how intersectional food systems are, and how we can't actually have a sustainable food system without operating within the boundaries of human health and sustainability. And we can't feed the 10 billion people that will be on this planet in 2050 without having that conversation first. So Paul Crutzen once coined the term the Anthropocene in about 2000, and that term basically describes the geological period in history where humans have made a significant impact on the Earth. And we're in that time period right now, and it's unquestionable that the food system is one of, if not the largest impact that we have on this planet. Livestock industry alone contributes to roughly 18% of greenhouse gas emissions by some estimates, and food emissions are expected to go up by 80% by 2050 at the current rate. And in order to meet our Paris climate goals, we can't continue at the rate we're going at. Some studies by science suggest that if we are to cut out all other forms of greenhouse gas emissions, we still won't be able to reach the Paris Climate Agreement if we don't cut out food emissions. So that sort of just underscores why it's important. And I think from the biodiversity perspective, we know that biodiversity has gone down by about 70% since 1970, according to WWF. And we also know that the biggest contributor, or one of the biggest contributors to this, is deforestation and unsustainable agriculture practices that contribute to land degradation. And of this, about 80% is for animal-based food production. And even amongst considering the plants, about 70% of plants that we currently produce are used to feed animals that are then fed to humans for human consumption, which is a lot more unsustainable than feeding a lot of those plants directly to humans. So with that all in mind, it's important to consider the impact of our current food system and the way food is produced, and how we need to, in a lot of ways, curb the production and consumption of animal-based foods. By a lot of estimates, we need at least a 50% reduction in red meat consumption and about a doubling of fruit, vegetable, legume, and nut consumption by 2050. And there are a lot of other problems that can arise from not being conscious of the impacts of the animal-based food system, including antibiotic resistance, which is now the leading cause of death for humans worldwide. An estimated 1.2 million people died from antibiotic resistance in 2019, and most of the antibiotics that are currently being used are used for animal-based food production. And we see in a lot of countries that the plant-based food industry is growing, but it's not growing fast enough. And we need more subsidies that are going towards bolstering these industries. And also, equally importantly, we need more international support. Countries need to start working together on actionable steps that they can take to reduce the amount of animal-based purchasing and animal-based production, but also just thinking about ways to optimize the sustainability of the food system as it currently is. In my role as a consultant to UNICEF on child nutrition in Eastern and Southern Africa, I've seen very clearly that plant-based indigenous diets have been part of cultures around the world for centuries before it became mainstream in the Western world. But one of the issues is we see with a lot of these nutrition counseling programs is that basically they're telling a lot of people that the foods that they've eaten for hundreds of years are not the proper diet that they need, or are not nutritionally adequate, which is not actually consistent with a lot of the data, suggesting that most micronutrient deficiencies that people experience in the global south are actually from a lack of fruits and vegetables. So the whole way that research and advertising around the health impacts of food is framed are also in some ways not backed by the research. In a lot of other ways, the countries that are part of this food system, specifically in the global south, are locked into trade agreements, a lot of unfair trade agreements with countries in the global north that force them to export certain products that are not consistent with their agriculture industry and what crops are available, and also force them into certain quotas that they have to meet, a lot of farmers, which also lead to an unsustainable food system. So I just wanted to emphasize that there's a big influence of um, agriculture and the agriculture industry's interests in specifically in the Western context that are impacting a lot of these countries. And by decentralizing the approach we have to food systems and really focusing on amplifying local community actors and their interests, I think we're a lot closer to representing what people really need and want in their communities. And I guess the final thing I'll emphasize is that we need more, as Megan also emphasized, we need more youth in the conversation, because youth are the future of the food system. We are the people who are going to inherit the problems with the food system as they continue to grow. So just being conscious of involving youth in the decision-making process and encouraging them to step up into careers in the food system and improving the sustainability and health of the food system.
I love it. Thanks so much, Naveen. I think you're right in that like food system is really one of the strongest levers we can pull on to create this like whole society transformation, right? And I'm so grateful you were able to lift up the extractive relationship that animal-based agriculture really is playing on the food systems and how much that solutions already exist, right? If we subsidize, if we reframe, if we rethink our relationship with what we're growing, how we're consuming it, and then in turn thinking about the like international relationships that put pressure on what is being grown and exported, I think there are pathways forward, right? And those pathways forward not only help address like our biodiversity crisis, address our climate crisis, but they also impact the health and well-being of people around the world. And so I think through this like initial panel conversation, we can kind of see this like holistic path that's been charted for us, right? We see how member states are working to create transformation at a policy level. We also see how UN agencies are really supporting that through the technical and scientific pursuit, and then also creating the policies that are needed to really guide us towards that better food systems, one that is really holistic and integrated. And then we're also seeing how youth are championing that way forward in a way that sheds the injustice of how we may have existed before and shines a light on the models and best practices that we do have to take us forward. And so with this, we know we want to make sure that this session isn't just us talking with each other here, but that we get to talk with you all. And so we're now transitioning to the second part of our side event, which is my favorite. It's interactive time, right? So we're going to be splitting into breakout groups as a way to have like genuine conversation with each other. And we're going to frame it in two key parts. So the first conversation we're going to have with each other is really centered around what are the key considerations and themes at this intersection of food systems, climate, and biodiversity that you're concerned with, right? Whether it's your organization, you as an individual, maybe we've spoken about an idea, but you want to amplify it a little more, right? Or maybe you felt like there wasn't a part of this conversation that has been lifted up yet. So we'll invite our speakers in person here to split up into two groups, and we'll kind of have back of the room, one breakout group, front of the room, one breakout group, and we'll just like circle up in chairs. And then we'll have a second question that's really focused on sharing existing examples, right? So what is your organization doing to really integrate food systems in a more holistic way into your work on climate and biodiversity, right? So I'll let you know when we get to question 2. First, let's go at question 1, right? Which is really themes and considerations. We also have about 24 people joining us online, and Cecilia is online with us as well, right? And so we want to also have the same breakout group conversation with our folks online. So I'm going to turn off security settings so y'all can unmute your mics. You can raise your hands. You can have your videos on, but we're going to mute the TV here in the room so we won't be hearing your breakout group conversation, right? Ines will be helping facilitate this breakout online, and through that we'll be collecting this conversation. From there, we will then encourage you all to report back after we have our breakout groups, so you'll be able to hear what's happening in the room. We'll be able to hear what's happening online. So with this, I'll now ask us to get up, form 2 circles naturally, and then we'll invite our speakers to join us in those circles and begin having conversations. And when you hear the mic, you know it's time to swap to the next question. Thank you guys so much.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ines Leon Jimenez. I work at FAO for the World Food Forum, more specifically for the Youth Assembly team. So we're an inclusive platform aiming at youth engagement for creating the needed policies for youth by youth. So I'm based in the FAO Rome headquarters, and I will have the pleasure to be the facilitator of this breakout group. So maybe we can go around the first round of very quick introductions, and then dive into the question. So maybe when answering the first question of what are the key considerations and themes at the intersection of food systems, climate, and biodiversity, just quickly introduce yourself when answering the question. So who wants to start? I think it's a very thrilling question. So just feel free to take the floor and to engage. Yes, please. You do not need to raise your hand, but please take the mic, Lynn.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm Lynn Diaz-Maceo. I'm based in Berlin, Germany. I'm part of the North American Food Systems Network, and am going to be a slow food delegate at this year's Terra Madre Festival in September. One of the key considerations that I have noticed during my work at this nexus of food systems, climate change, and biodiversity are agroforests, like our food forests, for example, and keeping in mind that those need to be in alignment with a better and sustainable ecosystem instead of focused on human consumption. So a lot of times when food forests are being designed and created, usually they are being kept with human consumption in mind and do not take care of things like biomes and natural parts of the ecosystem and the keeping certain species in mind and within the design that need to be put at the forefront. And yeah, so that is something that I've really noticed during my work that is important to keep in mind, like who are we doing this for? And to understand that the ecosystem benefits everyone. And I've noticed that a lot of times that that conversation doesn't take place in policy making and decision making rooms.
Thank you so much. That's, I think, very enlightening. And jumping onto these considerations, is there anyone else willing to reflect on the intersection between food systems, climate, and biodiversity? What are your remarks concerning this intersection? What would be your recommendations maybe for more inclusive policies? You can just take the floor if you wish.
Hi, my name is Safia. Oh, sorry. You want to go? Well, my name is Sophia. Right now I'm working to transition to this food industry, and I'm a food engineer, but I have been doing other stuff professionally. And I think very important in this intersection is also like education around like linking food and linking climate and linking all these issues together, because I think like food is very important culturally and socially. So people just take that approach or take it like, like we usually just eat because we need to or we want to eat something and don't think very deeply about what's behind food or like these other themes that are very like relevant to it. And we rarely focus on the source of the food or how it is produced. And I learned a lot when I was in college. I'm a food industry engineer. So like all the transformation of food from its source to the shelves. And it was very meaningful and like very impactful for me to see how I had no idea of a lot of these things until I went to college and I learned it, but that was my special field. So all of the other people who eat every single day, we don't make this connection or we don't question it. We just do it. And I also find when people ask me, because I went plant-based, they ask me, sometimes I start explaining and kind of they stop me and don't want to know further. So it's also like very uncomfortable for people to hear something that like they don't agree with or they don't like because they didn't know about it. So I don't know. I found that like the knowledge and the information and education that we have regarding food is very, very limited unless we seek it.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. You want to have the floor?
Hi, everybody. My name is Rebecca Louie, and I'm the executive director at the Bee Conservancy. We're a nonprofit based in New York. We do work nationally, but as you could probably guess, we're particularly interested in saving the bees. And, I really appreciate everybody's comments and sort of holistic thinking around how everything is intertwined. Systems, climates, biodiversity, they all have everything to do with each other. And for us, bees pollinate 1 in 3 bites of food that we eat. And though honeybees are the main agricultural, quote unquote, workforce that do this because they can be managed and, they have a very different way of living. They're actually only like a fraction of the world's 20,000 bee species. And a lot of these other 19,900, blah, 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 other bees have co-evolved over time for local ecosystems to do the amazing work of pollinating. And so for me, or for us as an organization and sort of in the food discussion, I should add we're particularly interested in food security as well as working in underserved and historically under-resourced areas and communities. Like the big question for us is how do we shift a lot of our current agricultural and frankly land management practices as well, because there are the farms where food is being grown, but then there's all these adjacent plots of land everywhere. For us, we look at urban settings where we can kind of plant and treat green spaces differently to encourage those native pollinator populations that then can thrive and theoretically go around and do all the great work of pollinating food, whether that's at a large scale, which is, farms and sort of big ag, or organic small org, but also in those community gardens or urban farms where, communities have really taken the issue to heart and have been able to grow food to feed themselves. So, at the bee level, it's a little abstract because people are thinking about the food chains and the animals and the humans and sort of down the line of where the consumption is happening. But, the bees contribute $15 billion worth of agricultural product in the US alone. So globally, that's some other like ridiculous number. And it's interesting. And I'm just curious, and I'd love to hear just about people's work and solutions or thoughts just around, how, yes, the education is amazing, but how does education turn into action? Maybe that's one of our challenges as well as an org. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So next on the speakers list, we have Brian Matara and then Lorenza Giaccia. I'm sorry if I mispronounce your names. And I I'm also aware that we have 10 minutes left and that we're encouraged to tackle the second question. So if you want to merge your answers, maybe that would be a good answer. So please, Brian. Brian, do you hear me? Do you want to intervene? You have your hand raised.
Oh,
Perfect.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please go ahead.
Oh, thanks. I'm Brian Matara from Kenya, Nairobi, Kenya, representing Act for Food. Act for Food is a non-profit organization that is seeking to improve food systems with a number of priorities within which we are incorporating some priorities to ensure that we are responding directly to how we improve food systems and how to put more voice on how we can encourage climate smart agri-food transformation. And so basically what we are doing as a youth leader for Act for Food this year, we had a workshop in Netherlands last month, which in the meeting we deliberated on major issues that we want to build focus on, and a number of things that we identified that were very crucial to move forward with. How do we access and build more access on health and nutritious food as we improve our food systems? How do we, and one of the campaigns that we came up with is revamping food systems within our school feeding programs, educating people on food and promoting indigenous food that is at some point losing the value it has been having over the years. And so we're trying to build on how we can promote indigenous food from across the globe. And some of the final things that we discussed earlier in the workshop was food production and how we can tackle issues within climate change, which has been very, very key and vital in, leading spaces to food insecurity and a number of ways that we can access our food and even interact within climate smart agriculture. And so that's what we are doing as Act for Food, and we are really moving at a good step to ensure that we are making good solutions to promote food systems and also promote green jobs and employment for the youth, being that we are directly advancing or maybe promoting biodiversity and climate action. So that's what I could say for now. And with the limited time, I think we can engage later on. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Brian. So we had this example of the workshop for showing this integrated approach within food systems in a more holistic way, also with climate and biodiversity. So next we have Lorenza that wanted to take the floor.
Thank you, Ines, and really thank you for participating and convening this session. I thought it was really interesting. My name is Lorenza. I work in the resident coordinator's office in Serbia. And I wanted to continue the reflection on this intersection between climate change and biodiversity loss and the food system by adding this fact that was mentioned during the meeting that if everyone shifted towards plant-based diet, we would need almost 80% less of land, 76%. And these are numbers that were confirmed by many studies, and that conveniently were put together by ProVeg in a website that is called Food Facts. And how can we promote that transformation? That is the important question. And I think here what we need to think of is innovative ways that are built on the premise of being resilient to climate change. Because when we project the numbers forward of the impact of climate change on the numbers of heat days that will be hitting us, of the number of floods, we need to take this in consideration when we plan our investment for the future. And we cannot simply build on what we have, and we cannot also shield what we have from future impacts. This will not happen. It's the scale of the disasters that are going to impact us require complete transformation. So what we need to do is look at the finance and how the finance can accompany that transformation. So bring about this transformation of finance towards innovative solutions that can feed the planet in 2030, in 2040, in 2050, when the climate will be very different from now. Over.
Thank you so much for this example on finance. And then we have Duncan that wanted to take the floor, so please do.
Yes, hello. I'm Duncan Williamson from Rainforest Alliance. I'm the Global Head of Policy and Public Affairs. And just a glimmer of optimism. I first started working on food systems in 2008, and the conversation has progressed so far in that time. It's gone from being niche, rejected at many of the UN didn't want to talk about it. My first COP was in Copenhagen, which was a disaster. I mentioned food and I was looked at like I was insane. So the conversation has moved on so much. We're looking a lot more holistically. We're making the connection between climate and biodiversity. We're having conversations around diet. Some people advocating for complete plant-based, others for just a reduction in meat consumption, as long as it's culturally sensitive and respects other people's views. That's the really important bit, recognizing that we're all different and we all have different backgrounds. But at Rainforest Alliance, one thing we're looking at this is we've done a lot of work. We represent 7.4 million farmers and farm workers. And what we're seeing is there's great work happening on the environmental side of food systems. But there's still a lot of work to be doing on the human rights side and the social justice side. That's still missing. Even a lot of people are advocating for it. When we dig into it, we're not seeing nearly enough attention being paid to sort of gender discrimination, to child labor, to that not respecting people's cultural choices. So there's a really urgent need in this intersection to, if we're talking systemically, to act systemically in our work, to bring the systemic approach to it. And that is still missing, but it is starting to happen. And we know that's part of the conversation, the role of Indigenous communities at the CBD. This is going to be the first CBD that the Rainforest Alliance is attending with our Colombian office, but also some other people as well. We've decided it's too important not to be there. But one of the ways that we've learned and we've evolved, we no longer just work on certification. We work on landscape level approaches, and that's something we've recognized is you need to look beyond just getting coffee as sustainably produced as possible, getting cocoa, bananas, tea, etc. But you have to work with other people in that landscape, the other users of that area, to ensure that you work together and everyone progresses, everyone benefits together from the changes, the adaptations, the increased incomes, enhancing a living income. And that's something that we're learning to do. And I feel that we're getting better and better at doing it. And the other thing that we've really learned to do is we're really mainstreaming agroforestry in our work as well, how you can bring that to degraded landscapes, because it's such an exciting way. Because when you do agroforestry, you can actually increase yields, you can tackle climate change, and you can bring back biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I know that our breakout room will come to an end. Okay, yeah, we're wrapping up. So thank you so much for your interventions, and see you for the recap.
Hi, guys. We're slowly wrapping up. So we'll have final comments and then we'll head back to our main groups. Sebastian, my dear friend, if I can ask you guys to take your seats, and we'll quickly, in the interest of time, close out our sessions. So I hope you guys had a good time in your breakouts. We'll now invite Inés to kind of share the perspectives of our digital breakout group and the conversation that was taking place there.
Of course, thank you so much for having me for this event. So first of all, I'm Ines Jimenez. I work at FAO headquarters for the World Forum Division, more specifically for the Youth Assembly, which serves as a platform for fostering youth engagement to create policies that are adapted to their needs. So also in this inclusive approach and really providing equal opportunities. So to respond to our first question of the key considerations and themes at the intersection of food systems, climate, and biodiversity, we had an intervention that emphasized the need to be better aligned on having better ecosystems rather than on human consumption, to think about certain species that we're going to affect while building a number of agricultural initiatives. So yeah, to really understand the ecosystems and understanding that it benefits everyone to support the ecosystems. Then we had an intervention that really focused on education and the importance of questioning where does this food come from, and also understanding maybe some frictions that are existing among the food industry. Then we had an intervention that was focusing on the bees. So how can we shift our agricultural practices to enable the work of the pollinators that they do so well within urban farms or community gardens? So also the question was how to bring policies to action, to concrete action. We had a comment also on equal access to justice and decision. So exactly like having an inclusive space to discuss biodiversity and climate challenges. And to answer the second question of the examples to better integrate this holistic approach within the food systems and biodiversity questions. We had one example of a workshop that was led in Kenya, and it was really emphasizing on school feeding programs, also educating people on the food that they consume and promoting indigenous food, all of that in a holistic approach, of course. Then we had an intervention regarding plant-based diets and the key role of finance within this framework of transformation. And as a last intervention, we had an intervention focusing on rainforests and on also the progress that has been made within the space of discussion, that before talking about holistic approach and biodiversity, climate change was a bit taboo within institutions. And now that we are overcoming that, and we need to have a more social outlook within these whole conversations, emphasizing on human rights, gender equality, child rights, and respectful cultures. So that was the very interesting discussions that we had in this group. So thank you so much. Looking forward to hearing the others.
Thank you so much, Ines. I'll now pass to our first group's report back, which I believe is from Wolf. And then we'll ask you to keep reflections brief.
Right. Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who shared conversation in our group. So we covered a number of different topics. I think the first one that came up with regard to what are some key considerations and themes at the intersection of these issues, it was the importance of actually talking explicitly about what sustainable diets consist of, especially transitioning to plant-based diets, plant-based food systems, since there are frequently allusions to sustainable agriculture, to food system transformation, but it's rare for anyone to actually name the issue, and that we need to change that and be more explicit. There was some discussion of the importance of partnering with indigenous groups, many of whom are pioneering, or have not just pioneering, but have been doing for hundreds, thousands of years, traditional sustainable modes of agriculture, but who often have solutions imposed from outside without necessarily being consulted, and how an important concrete action that can be taken is to co-create with these groups to ensure that they have a say in what solutions are going to work for them. there was a comment that small island developing states are in many ways in an analogous position to indigenous groups, often facing food insecurity, often dependent on imports, and dependent on outside sources of finance. There was some discussion of the importance of the role of the consumer, that we need to shift consumption practices, and that one aspect of this is achieving price parity. So, for example, one specific example was to remove surcharges on plant-based milk alternatives, which of course discourage people from getting those. As well as finding out what products are actually the most marketable for plant-based alternatives. Snacks, for example, apparently being more profitable than like dairy alternatives. Did I understand that right? It's a growing category of plant-based snack foods. Yeah, apologies if I'm missing anything. If anyone wants to interject an additional point that I missed, you're certainly welcome to. Oh, one other, I forgot to mention my own point, which was that I think we need to be explicit about the connections between the environmental aspects of food systems with regard to climate and biodiversity and food insecurity. Because if we don't address this explicitly, it's easy to fall into a perception that the two are in conflict, that in order to feed the world and achieve the goal of zero hunger, we need to ensure everyone has access to protein, and we need to ramp up food production. And this is often used as an excuse, for example, for increasing meat consumption and animal agriculture. But then that directly contradicts climate action, which to reduce emissions, we have to lower these things. So it's important to seek win-win solutions here and to ensure that we're actually educated on both the social and the environmental aspects of food system transformation, because it is possible to have win-win solutions that benefit both people and the more than human world.
Thank you so much. I'll report back for our last group, and I'll try to be brief. I'm Amelia. I'm from Mercy for Animals, and we had a wonderful discussion across our group. We talked about linking different levels of policy action from national to community levels, and recognizing that this policy work often takes place at different speeds, and that often city and local level work can happen a lot faster. We also talked about, echoing a lot of the panel discussion, taking a holistic approach that covers production through consumption, including sustainable diets in particular. And we talked about the need for climate finance for our food systems, and how to model different financial models. We also talked about balancing the tension of individual behavior change versus the need for more systemic change, and the need for data to enable this behavior change. And then I wanted to give just a couple of examples that were shared. Sorry. So we had some great examples within our group of a project of a school farmers project to open the minds of students to careers in the agri-food system sector, to pursue different professions, including technical and scientific careers around agriculture and food. We also had an example of smallholder farmer cooperatives and facilitating access to input and trainings. We also had some wonderful examples from right here in New York City on how the city itself is making food systems part of the climate conversation and including food emissions in reporting. And then we had some wonderful examples from Palau as well about bringing traditional plant-based foods into schools and into younger generations. And I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Amelia, Ines, and Wolf. I think it's been such a fruitful conversation. And so in closing, I want to pass the mic back to our speakers for one final round of closing reflections for each of you. So I'll start with Charlene, and just after this lovely conversation, if you have any closing thoughts on your side.
Thank you. First, I want to say thank you so much for inviting me because I learned so much from these sessions. I think really after the breakout groups, my main takeaway is what can I do in my position as National Environment Coordinator, involving mostly at the policy level. It became very clear that policy is often too slow and changes in our climate is just happening too fast. In that space, what can I do in my national government level do to have a quicker impact? And I think the solution for me is start with the kids. We already have these wonderful initiatives that are already happening with changing lifestyle preference of food preferences, but specifically in relation to biodiversity. Oftentimes when we've talked about biodiversity, it's for the conservation of the ecosystem benefits and the ecosystem function. I don't think we've had enough conversation about how that directly translates to our livelihood and basically our food and well-being. So that's kind of a new take that I'm taking from this session, and hopefully I'll employ it when I get home. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks so much, Charlene. I'll pass it now over to Cecilia online to give us a quick reflection from her side. So while we wait for Cecilia to unmute and open back video, we'll continue on, and I'll pass it first to Megan to kind of continue us in this conversation of like closing thoughts and learnings.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys again. I loved chatting with everyone in the breakout discussion and excited to keep a lot of these conversations going as well. So before we head out, love to connect with people on many of these dialogues. I have two things that I guess I'll try to keep a little bit brief about closing takeaways. One, a little bit more specific to my work. If you are also interested and involved in urban food systems work, urban gardens, a piece that I didn't really mention earlier, but I think is really critical to a lot of this is not, again, thinking about just now increasing just urban gardens themselves, but also the long-term longevity and sustainability of many of these spaces. And so a lot of times what we see in our work is we're actually revitalizing a lot of existing urban gardens. A lot of those spaces already there, but after a year, 2 years of people creating them, they just lay there and no one is taking care of them. And so just a note of, if you're getting more involved in a lot of that aspect of work, something to think about. And then two slightly more broader takeaways. One of them coming from our breakout room, I was thinking a lot about kind of this idea of uplifting people versus just actually having them as decision makers in many of these spaces. And I think for many of the vulnerable communities that we're talking about, youth, children, women, indigenous communities, et cetera, oftentimes we feel like, we're put into these spaces as people who are sharing these different thoughts, but when it comes to actually making critical decisions or those actual levers of change, then we're left out of the decision-making room. And so just as you're involving more intergenerational conversations into a lot of your work, something that I would really, really think a lot about. And then last thing would be co-design, and what does co-design actually mean? So thinking a lot about our power dynamics that exist when we are approaching a lot of this work. If you're working and partnering with indigenous communities, if you're working with young people, how am I coming into this space versus how are they coming into that space? And ensuring that you're actually trying to even out some of those differences in playing fields when you're working collaboratively on a lot of these projects.
Cool. Well, first of all, thank you all so much for this event. It's been a pleasure speaking to you and with my fellow panelists. First, I really just want to underscore the urgency of the situation at hand. I think we all know that we're not very close to achieving SDG 2 and many of our other sustainable development goals, but more so as these goals, as climate change becomes more exacerbated and a lot of these other problems worsen, it'll become harder and harder. And I think one of the biggest issues that exists is that we don't have enough people focusing on these intersections. Maybe at an event like this, we might see more of those people, but if you kind of go out into the real world and think about what students who are in college are focusing on, what people in their careers are focusing on. We don't see a huge emphasis on addressing hunger, food insecurity, and its intersection with climate change and with public health. So I want to underscore for our organization, Food for Thought, what we do is we build relationships between students in the future of food and the industry. So if there's any students you know who are interested in being part of this work, please feel free to reach out to me. I also want to underscore the urgency of more finance as in this industry, as we all know, and in particular, the lack of cohesion as to where the money is going in often conflicting ways, making it less effective at achieving its goals. So just thinking about how we can optimize that more effectively. And finally, for everybody in the audience, I really want us to start asking more questions about how much we know about food and how much of what we know about food is actually informed by data and science and people on the ground who are experiencing actual hunger and poverty and a lot of other issues that are exacerbated by food insecurity, and how much of what we currently know is informed by NGOs that are imposing nutritional interventions on a lot of areas, how much is informed by agriculture companies that are funding a lot of the research, which is a problem that's pretty pervasive in the food system. So just asking more questions, being more curious and open-minded, and learning more about that. And then when you figure out how you want to make your mark, do it.
Love that. Thanks so much, guys. I'll now pass it over to Cecilia for her closing 1 minute, 2 minute remarks.
And thank you. Sorry, I could open my idea. After the session is clear that there's several examples for important actions and biodiversity and the management of climate change around the sustainable agri-food system. The integration, the communities and the participation on constructive process and the education is the comprehensive management. Thank you so much.
So much, Cecilia, and thank you all for being here with us. I think it's been such a wonderful treat to be in community and conversation with you all as we look at this deeply interconnected issue. I think we're also super grateful for all of our co-organizers for really working hard to put this together, from World Food Forum, FAO, the Urban Garden Initiative, National Young Farmers Coalition, Mercy for Animals, ProVeg International, and Act for Food. This couldn't have happened without you guys. And of course, to the team at the Tzu Chi Center who helped hold the space for us to be in conversation. Also, deeply grateful to Colombia and Palau for your support in bringing your expertise and perspectives to this conversation. I think it really elevated our ability to reflect in an impactful and meaningful way. And of course, to Food for Thought for being here, Urban Garden Initiative. I think your expertise in championing youth voices and bringing these unique perspectives is what was needed for us to have this diverse and dynamic conversation. So we'll continue to build this power forward. I think this work isn't done alone, it's done in community. So we encourage you after this event to continue to be in this space, connect with each other, have those conversations, follow up, and we'll be coming back together in conversation in September during UNGA High Level Week, during Climate Week as well. And we look forward to inviting you back into this space for a continued momentum and continued power. Okay, that's about it. My brain's fried. I care so much for you guys, and I'm so happy you're with us. Thank you so much.